All right, I think it's time to get started. Never done a live podcast intro in my life, so it's going to be short and sweet. But thank you so much, everyone, for being here, both in the chat and on this Discord call. I'm pretty excited. I feel like most of the people here in the chat, and certainly all the people in the video, have consumed a lot of these types of long form spoiler conversations about Rebirth at this point, and watched a lot of offline videos as well. But I feel like the question of like what exactly is going on with the worlds, are they multiverses, are they dreams, is there a real world, are they all in the live stream, etc., is a very amorphous conversation topic that I haven't really seen put together into one single targeted discussion or video. So I was like, let's just do it. Let's just get the biggest brains in one room and see what everyone thinks about that specific question. What are the worlds? So I thought we could do very briefly, if you want to just one by one introduce yourself. Doesn't have to be long-winded or anything. And then I was thinking maybe just give a very vague overview of how you reacted playing Remake and Rebirth to the introduction of these elements, and if that has maybe changed between Remake and Rebirth and since Rebirth's launch, and whatever you feel like sharing as a very vague overview of this topic. We could start with subtext. We could just go in order of the I don't know if it's the same order on your calls, but subtext, Clark, Sleepezi.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting to see the manifestation of the worlds concept. And actually, I was joking around with Sleepezi like a couple of months before the game came out. I don't know when it was, Sleepezi. I don't know. It's probably like November or so of last year. We were just like chit-chatting about Rebirth and like things we think could happen. And I remember joking, what'd be really ballsy is if they start this game with Zack, like playable Zack, just open the game with playable Zack, especially after like all the chaos that they created at the end of Remake. It would be, because everyone assumed, and I did too, that it would cold open into the flashback, but I was like, I feel like everyone's going to be antsy to see what's going on with that. And so the fact that they actually did start you off with playable Zack was it was like, okay, wow, they're really jumping into it. And then as everyone then realizes, they don't talk about it again for like cameras like
40 hours.
For like, Max, I think like a joke that in his playthrough they didn't actually like bring back Zack until like hour 36 or so. So it was, it took a while to get to it. So at that point I was very confused as to where they would go with things. And I was also, it also started to confirm something I was assuming, and I made a video about it too, of like, will Zack even make it out of Midgar? Because everyone assumed he would end up at the Forgotten Capital in the same world as our party and help save Aerith. And he was still lollygagging around just meeting Elmira by the almost halfway point of the game. So at that point, it was, I was confused as to what they were trying to do with the worlds. And then obviously by the end, they had the kind of cavalcade of worlds. And it was also interesting to get that confirmation of, because I always wondered, if there are multiple worlds, if there are multiple timelines, everyone was focused on Beagle Interior. What is it that stops there from being almost infinite timelines? I feel like once you open the Pandora's box to one, why is it just one? Why can't there be more? And sure enough, there are a lot. In terms of like what those things are, I think we could talk about it more later. But that's my overarching like take on the worlds and my first experience of them.
Sweet. You want to go next, Clark?
Yeah, so I mean, starting with Remake, the way that I conceptualized timelines was, I think, kind of maybe the first way that a lot of people did when you play Remake. You are introduced to this stamp thing constantly. Then you get to the final chapter, and you look at the assessments of the whispers, and they're using all these time-coded words, destiny. There's clearly indications throughout the game that Aerith can see, things that she shouldn't see, like in that, there's some kind of fourth wall breaking situation. And then you look at the word timelines, because I played it in English first, and that's the way the localizers chose to sort of conceptualize that, and I think it's fine, by the way, even now. But and then all of a sudden we see this terrier bag come by, and so I kind of had this thought that I think a lot of people did, which was just that, okay, we're in some kind of multiverse situation here. You know, I don't know what that means. I don't know the mechanics of it. Either the continuity has changed, and we're in just a linear continuity that now has a different makeup because of some unknown bootstrap in the future that's, you know, like come back to change things, or something that's outside of the quote unquote multiverse that's affecting the way that we're going to experience things. Moving into Rebirth, the concept of that peeled back into something much more esoteric and much more consciousness driven, right? Like the way that I kind of felt about what worlds are now is they seem to be manifestations of like POV characters, perception of a world, right? And the level at which they manifest seems to be pretty intense, like compared to, say, the way we do. We perceive things and the way we manifest things that we perceive. So the mechanics started to be more consciousness driven and less like hardcore Marvel MCU driven as I make it through the game, as we're starting to see the dialogue in Cosmo Canyon. And then the thing that always struck me about all of the Zack scenes and all of the scenes that showed these terriers that were desperate or disparaged from the Beagle verse is that they all happened in these very insular small versions of the continuity, right? Like we don't see any terriers in Gongaga. We don't see like any flash sideways in any areas outside of Midgar. They all seem to be centered around a character in a specific area, right? And the mechanics of that just started to get really murky, and it started to feel like, okay, we're missing some component of how it all comes together. And I think for me, I'm kind of now in the what the worlds are is they're like this place within the live stream is the mechanic by which it all happens. And I've always felt that the live stream was the mechanic by which anything would happen. Even if there is a multiverse, it's going to be actualized through the energy source of this world, which is live stream Mako. But now the way that it seems to be conceptualized, or the way that I'm starting to see it, is that it's something that's consciousness within the live stream manifesting these different worlds, and that these worlds are a place where a character's consciousness meets actualization, and the thing that in the Ultimania where Jima said that Yogacara and collective unconscious were the things that you could understand to kind of guess where things are going, really pointed me in that direction.
That's a great answer. I should have clarified that we're going to get to the what is the world's question after our introductions, but I should have been more specific. We got a little head start with Clark's there.
Okay. I think it was a good overview for sure, like kind of his thoughts though. And
Sleepezi, how was your just sort of general reaction to the introduction of these elements?
So I think to keep it super short, I think what Clark said very much mirrors a similar thought that I just have always had. It's always taken on different evolutions. Obviously, like my first conception of what was going on was based very heavily, if you go back to like my first video, is very heavily leaning on Dirge of Cerberus being important, and like the live stream kind of acting as like a cage for like Sephiroth and things like that, which in concept was really fun. But as I sort of attempted to try and track some sort of through line through the compilation to what we were seeing with Remake, the thing that became more and more clear is that all of these elements are somehow tied to just the characters in both a literal and very metaphysical way. So like tessellation was a big one, which was a huge part of like the portal of how Cloud gets to the edge of creation, and it's like a link to Cloud himself. It's a link to Sephiroth, and that idea eventually ended up, I think, like the very last thought I had about timelines was the idea of strands of like the live stream is that it could only be conceptualized through the live stream and the characters, whatever was happening. So whether you believed in the Marvel version of it or you believed in some other variation of it, to me, it always just came down to the way that the story is structured just will always come back to the characters and what they're feeling in a very like realistic way, in a very grounded way, not in a, oh, it's just like an artistic stroke that like this is somehow linked to Cloud's mind. I think as we've seen in Rebirth, it just continuously is bridging these incredibly large concepts to something more grounded, and more like the line between character and world is becoming pretty much non-existent as we continue forward. So I think that that's sort of where I went into Rebirth, and everything about Rebirth made me happy. So that's sort of where I like generally sit in this conversation. Really? Also, I'm Sleepezi. That's subtext. That's Schrodinger's BabySeal.
You pointed the wrong way.
I got their introductions down. It all works out. That's what it looks like to me.
Can I jump in on one thing before we move on to the next question?
Well,
because it's still super high level, and it's related to what Sleepezi said. Well, one of the things that also just confused me about the worlds, because I think there was like some level of understanding kind of made sense, like all these different explanations all made. But what was always weird in my very first conception of it, and even still now to this day, is the implication. I didn't understand the implication of, because it seems as though both Zack and Biggs describe essentially being pulled out of their realities. Zack as he's about to die, Biggs as he's sitting at the tower at the Sector 7 plate tower, and there's a description of like the wind, and then suddenly feeling like they're transported somewhere, right? And then they both end up in the Terrier timeline, is where we meet them. Hands with a Terrier world, whatever, and it just seems to, rather than them being distinct, it was just very interesting to me that there was an implication of those two were transported from maybe Beagle to Terrier, and I still haven't quite wrapped my head around that to some extent. But the thing that was related to what Sleepezi said was when he brought up Dirge, Sleepezi. I'm curious. It came to me as you were talking. I just wonder, do you think there's any potential relationship between this world's concept or I guess the world's concept and the secret ending of Dirge?
Yes. I've
spoken
about this at length on my streams. I love it.
I must have missed it. It comes to me now just that it is literally Genesis emerging from nothingness. And
Genesis wakes up, dude. He wakes up from
the water ball. Like, it wasn't there. Like, the cave is there. The water ball emerges, and then he falls out of it. He has his Terminator moment, and like, I don't know. Where is he coming from? I guess, and is that related to these concepts? I don't know.
It's literally him asleep and then awakening, just like other characters in the series. So
I think the word
I don't want to veer off into this is bait. this is hardcore bait.
No, I agree. I agree with subtext here. He's definitely being pulled in from another world or something right there. They definitely thought about this world shit back when.
Do you think Sleepezi is...
when Nomura just wanted to have his favorite pop artist in the game?
I don't think Sleepezi has ever said words in his life more than sleeping and waking and awakening.
That's right. Sleeping and waking. That's me.
So the thing I wanted to riff on briefly that Sleepezi had mentioned is I thought it's interesting that you brought up the word grounded, and that's a very important question, like whether or not the payoff to these world things is going to be an answer that is grounded in logic enough that we can be like, I see the A to Z of what this is, or if it's going to be, as I've heard Clark talk about before, a vibes thing. Like, as a quick little intro bonus question, if we can answer in like a sentence or two each, which is a big ask probably. Would you be satisfied if it turns out that the worlds are this very abstract, amorphous thing that if you try to logic it into sense, breaks? For me, I don't think so, but I'm open to maybe not, maybe being okay with it. But right now I'm like,
That's a great question, and the answer is I'm gonna have no choice.
I think I'm going to. I think it'll be harder for me to, I guess, accept in having an inability to easily or relatively easily find a logic to it. FF7 plays with some crazy concepts, even in the original, right? It's like different forms of cloud come together in the live stream sequence, and like, yeah, it's a little strange, but you can kind of get your head around it.
There's always a balance too with this stuff where it's like there's a lot of context, a lot of times where you can just accept something at face value. Like you get enough of the moving parts that you don't even feel like a need to look closer, but when you do look closer, it breaks apart. Most stories have mechanics like that. Like if you really look close, you can nitpick most sci-fi apart. So there is this magic line where it's like, is it so esoteric that you feel obligated to look deeply, and then when you do, nothing ever comes together? Or is it something that's presented well enough that, hey, I got the gist of it, and I actually do think that I probably would be more satisfied with the gist of it than we're going to get some weird, David Lynch style fever dream at the end that never connects and is G-rated,
Yeah,
especially coming off of two games. Especially just coming off of two games that are relatively esoteric and have caused people like us to dig into them for years. Like, I think the final game has to give you something that doesn't require as
some
much
kind of closure.
digging into.
Yeah, I'm thinking of two sort of examples or reference points. One is in the movie Looper. I think that's the one with time travel.
Bruce Willis and
Bruce Willis looks
JGL
almost looks at the camera and he's like, "Don't think too hard about it." And I'm like, I distinctly remember being put off by that, because I'm like, if you're telling me like a heady time travel sci-fi story, isn't half the point to like be like, look at all these cool connections and the logic of how this works out? And to me, that was kind of like, that wasn't my type of time travel story, because I want to be able to do that. Paradoxes like break my brain. And the other the other example is Suzume, which I like a lot, and I won't spoil any specifics. This is one of the movies from the guy who made Your Name. It's the one with the guy who turns into a chair. Very good movie. But there is a paradox time element to it that I don't think actually makes sense. It's like a cyclical chicken or egg thing, which can be kind of interesting, and it didn't ruin the movie or anything, but personally I don't love that, and I personally hope that Remake Part 3 solidifies some very specific rules for what is going on, but we'll see.
Just to really quickly chime in is that, jumping off of everyone has said, is internal logic is very important to me. As like an avid story observer and movie watcher, I think that if the media that you're watching can convince you that its internal logic is sound enough for you to engage with what is happening with the characters, then I am way more lenient. And that is a spectrum, depending on what movie I'm watching. But because, and this is something I've been thinking a lot about with Remake specifically, because I've spent so much time thinking about what that internal logic is, I feel like the most difficult part of talking about remake now for me is relaying how intentional everything is every step of the way when it makes a decision. And I think that has been carrying me through a lot of the more divisive elements of like Rebirth for me, especially when it comes to like bigger topics like this one or Aerith's death or what is the ultimate goal of Sephiroth. Like, we're not entirely sure. Like, that has been the driving force for me, is that all of the pieces that they're using do have sound construction beneath them, even though it just seems like they're just kind of maybe running with like their tail on fire or something like that. It to me, I think, to answer the question more directly, is yes, I think I could, but I don't think that that's the story that they're telling. So based off of that, I would say for this one, yes, but likely not what has already been set up for me.
Yeah, to set up a bunch of questions and mystery boxes, if the end goal is to say there are no answers, it's all super vague and about the feels, I do think is kind of a setup for disappointment, personally.
To quickly jump on what Sleepy was saying too, in terms of like the difficulty of finding the internal logic of the remake story, the trilogy story, I think one of the things that's unique to this experience versus others is that we're struggling to find the internal logic of the worlds, right? But in reality, we're also struggling to find the internal logic of a lot of concepts, you know, in terms of changing fate, in terms of, you know, why bring back Zack? Why put him on the cover and give him 40 minutes of game time? Like, and I think part of that is because the logic is potentially ascribed to the entire trilogy, and we've only gotten 2 parts. So there are like things that are done in the first 2 games, and you're like, why are they doing that? They aren't like really making good on these things. And it's because I think they're thinking of the long term. They're thinking of the full 3-game experience. So Zack's story seems like it meanders and goes nowhere, but I think it's because hopefully there was a bigger role for him in the 3rd game that makes the strangeness of his utilization in this game make sense in retrospect. But
I think you are probably right, and I also think there was probably way more Zack that was left on the cutting room floor for or condensed for budget purposes, just because I feel like that makes sense. I didn't really answer the first sort of broad introductory question of like what my general reaction to all this was, and I'll try to make it really concise because we need to get to our actual first official question. So my reaction to the end of Remake was actually very negative at first, because all this time they're like, you're getting a Final Fantasy VII Remake, the thing you've always wanted, blah blah blah, and I get to the end and I'm like, this game is so amazing, and then the twist is basically this isn't a Final Fantasy VII Remake, or at least at the time it was kind of like, it seemed like they were about to change a bunch of stuff. And then throughout Rebirth, realizing, okay, it's still almost entirely the same, but there's this extra layer of things to speculate about and mysteries to solve. Ended up really getting on board with that. And of course, like all of us with the Maximilian Dude videos, we were like, timelines, blah, blah, blah. And then throughout Rebirth, started coming to the conclusion that it's more spiritual, more live stream related, probably, which we'll hopefully get some hypothetical answers for as we go through this. But when I finished Rebirth, I had a similar reaction to Remake, where again I was kind of negative at first. I was like, this was supposed to be the most emotional scene in the whole game probably, and it wasn't. And then I was like, wait, they're like delaying this, we're still gonna get the burial scene next game probably, blah blah blah. And so right now I'm kind of in a place of like, I'm just giving them the benefit of the doubt. I don't love everything about the editing of the final scenes and stuff, but it's not over. Benefit of the doubt, content for now. But then after I beat it, and after I processed all that, I started realizing that I was just kind of annoyed that I don't understand what all of this is. Like I needed to come up with like some hypothetical, this is what's going on answers, so that I could feel like it was actually building towards something that will make sense. Because for a while there, I was like, I don't know if the end result is going to be worth it. Like, this is so potentially convoluted, and this is like 7 wasn't that. And so I started becoming pretty worried that the end result isn't going to satisfy me. But then I was sort of able to sort of piece it together, and I'll get into sort of my current views about some of these worlds and stuff. And that was kind of the inspiration behind doing this video, is that I feel like there's probably a lot of people out there who are like, I truly have no idea what is going on with any of this, and that's a frustrating place to be in for 3 to 4 years until the next game comes out. So that being said, I think we're ready to get into question 1, which is the big question. And let me click my little Streamlabs button to illuminate it. Oh, it's white now, hooray. So the first question is, what are the alternate worlds? What the Beagle world has to do with this will be the next question. Right now, just the worlds that were introduced at the end of... Whoa, there's dialogue in this audio track. Threw me off. So the alternate worlds that we're introduced to with the Terrier at the end of Remake, and then the other dogs in Rebirth, the non-Beagle worlds, not the one we're playing through with Cloud and Company. What are they? And I think I'll start us off with this one. I feel like this is such a complicated topic that I don't know if I can do it justice by just riffing, so I wrote down a paragraph and a half, and I'm just going to read it to make sure I like get the words out in a logical way that makes sense. So my perspective on what the alternate worlds might be right now is that the alternate worlds are essentially bubble worlds that exist within the life stream. Bubble meaning not a complete universe, a small like recollection of certain memories and stuff. So I think they're spiritual planes of existence that, just like materia, are a combination of dreams, fears, knowledge, and memories. I think it's likely that real people who have lived and died are unconsciously authoring these realities, like Clark was bringing up earlier, possibly as like a coping mechanism to grapple with death, like kind of like ghosts are portrayed in a lot of things, and some similar stuff to the show Lost. Sometimes I think multiple real people overlap in these worlds, like Biggs and Zach. I don't think entire planets or universes exist within these worlds. I think since it's based on memory and emotion, it's kind of an illusion anyway, which is why I call it a bubble world. It's a small partial recollection of reality based on specific perspectives. But it's also possible that these worlds are at least partially made of memories that the planet itself has. I don't really lean in that direction, but it could be. And if that's the case, maybe it could be even the planet remembering infinite time loops now that Destiny has been broken and stuff like that. But I think more than likely it's probably based on character perspectives. So regardless of all of this, I think there's spiritual bubble worlds that represent the, like, thematically and literally the infinite potential of what reality could look like if we only fight for it in true Final Fantasy fashion. And that's my answer. So we'll move on to subtext now. What are the alternate worlds?
I will actually defer to BabySeal only because I think part of my answer may be a subset of something he's been talking about for months that I didn't fully buy into until maybe recently, as I was like working through my own logic on things, and I came to a conclusion that's in my video, and I was like, this might be kind of what Clark was getting at, but I just couldn't wrap my head around it. So I'll pass to him and then I'll answer afterward, just because I think he deserves credit on what he may have conceptualized.
So I think to answer specifically, I kind of already did answer. I fully agree with the bubble like idea. Like the mechanics are that these are these pocket dimensions, pocket worlds. But I think mechanically what's happening is that these are chunks of the life stream that have been torn away from the planetary life stream. So they're these pocket bubbles of literal Mako energy, and that they are the food that Jenova and Sephiroth are gaining power through. It's through eating these bubble worlds.
Just to interject real quick about the word bubble, it randomly occurred to me, like last night when I was jotting down thoughts about this, like when Sephiroth shows us these worlds and there's a bunch of bubbles, they also kind of look like materia.
Don't even get me fucking started about this.
No, you got it. So, but it does seem really clear that these little,
We broke Sleepezi.
these worlds are sort of the composition of its occupants, like, and how they cross into the maybe grander live stream, that's a bit different question, but it's like really clear that most of for instance the experiences that we have surrounding Aerith and in Midgar are Aerith related things. Like the Aerith has a very lore specific relationship with Biggs, for instance, and even Kyrie. Those are characters specifically connected to Aerith in outer lore, right? In the in Traces of Two Paths, and even The Kids Are All Right. So all of these characters that, like, why are they here also? And why did they have this other set of memories? What, all of those seem to be related and relationally connected to Aerith. So it does really feel like, a lot of what's happening in these dimensions does seem to be centered on a single person's consciousness, and then its makeup seems to change based on the participants, and that's why will see, a different stamps show up. I have toyed with the idea that they are, that they are in materia, that what we're experiencing is, it's within holy, that's how interchangeable and loose the concepts of memory are, and they can be applied in so many ways. It's kind of a deus ex of a concept, and so that can be a little irritating, but it does seem like they're really going to be focusing on using it in very specific ways that are driven with the mind and driven with the consciousness. So I don't know. I want you to expand on that more, Subtext.
Yeah, I mean, I think, where I come down on, and I don't have all the sort of, the scope of my conception is maybe a bit smaller, although I think it plays into everything you just said. But what came to my mind is, so we know from the Cosmocanon NPC, right? She says what is it how does the life stream distinguish between real lived memories and desires of the heart? Because we remember things that we want to do, right? Like, we all have dreams, things that we wanted to do in our lives, and we have a memory of that potential path that we could have gone down, that never actually happened, but we still have a memory of it. And if the life stream is made of knowledge and memories, then the life stream in some ways can preserve those memories just as legitimately as other memories, right?
Yeah, I like to picture it as like if you laid out 1,000 Polaroids taken from inside your brain that were memories of real life, memories of dreams, memories of nightmares, you wouldn't be able to tell which was real and which wasn't. It's just a bunch of snapshots of things that your inner eye has seen.
So how I understand it and how it intersects with Baby Seal's sort of conception of it is because for a long time he's talked about it, a lot of these worlds belonging to specific characters, and I struggled with that only because it seems like there was crossover or some level of objectivity to their existence, right? Like, the white materia passes from Aerith's dream into our prime reality. And so I was struggling to understand how that could be possible if, let's say, Aerith's dream was just her dream, and Zack's dream was just his dream, and Cloud's dream was just his dream. What I've come to believe now is that I do think these worlds, and so I thought, for a long time that it was like Breaking Fate created objective secondary realities, right? That are potentially true for everyone. I think now where I stand is the line that's bothered me most, and I always try to come back to, what does the game say, right? Like, that's the only thing I can really trust is what is actually in the game.
Yeah.
And the thing that is said at the start of chapter 14, when Aerith and Cloud are sitting in the room in Sector 5 in Aerith's house, in both English and Japanese, she says, think of it as a dream, my dream. And so that aspect of my dream, like, why did they have to specify that it was specifically her dream? If not, because it was tied specifically to her. Hence, like, validating what BabySeal's been talking about. So I do think that these realities, these broken fates, belong to the individual people. So that's why in Aerith's dream, we don't see Zack, as we've seen in all the other things, because the Zack that we see is living in some other memory. Potentially Cloud's, especially since we literally go in and out of the Terrierverse through Cloud's eyeballs twice in the game.
Right.
In the Gold Saucer when he goes to sleep.
Yeah, Zach picked the wrong server. What the hell?
So you know, for me, like, each of these bubble worlds that we're seeing are manifested by the dreams of individual people that go into the live stream. Real dreams, unrealized dreams, both. But those things are essentially are as real as the real memories. So I think that'll play a role later on in terms of having to come to acceptance of, like, maybe certain realities that we create, like Cloud creating in his head that Aerith lived. You know, when he gives that up, when he has to come to acceptance of, like, real reality, it'll be putting that thing to rest forever, you know.
We'll get to this later, but I actually no longer think that was in his head. But that's a question for later in the discussion. Sleepezi, I think you're the only one left, right?
Yeah, so I think every person has just kind of I just want to be I want to answer the question, but I also want to just take a second to also say that what everyone has said so far seems like a really good game. Seems like a really fun story that is keeping me engaged. So I want to just stress that before adding on. So one of the very first things that I think about when thinking about this subject of Final Fantasy VII is the combination of memories and real life. The real life in terms of the game's, like, tangible reality. And that was a very big subject for me back when I was making my videos, is just exploring how low the barrier was for the game to kind of be intersecting between these ideas that are going on in Cloud's head and how they sort of tangibly became a part of, you know, reality. In very minor ways, you can say Sephiroth. In, you know, other ways, you can see, like, Edge of Creation perhaps being something like that. But the thing that I kind of always overlooked was Zack's statement in Crisis Core, which was just drilled into everybody's head, is this embrace your dreams concept, and how that immediately fit so well into what Rebirth's discussion of it was, where it was like, no, dreams are also tangible aspects of the live stream. They're tangible aspects that can manifest in the same way that memories are also core aspects of like materia, for instance. You're talking about the function of, literally based off of knowledge, manifesting something as incredible as, like, fire, of wind, and all these other spells. And this is how Final Fantasy VII's logic has always worked. I also don't want to dive too far into the materia thing because it will tangent me, but I want to just bring everyone's attention to the very first conversation that we have in Final Fantasy VII that is an exposition dump, which is Sephiroth talking about how materia functions in Nibelheim. And that, because of that being the introduction of the game, I think has a lot more significance than I think a lot of OG players have. I think that's where they're hiding a lot of their sort of nuggets of information, is in the normal, in the things that it's like, yeah, we've heard this dialogue before. Doesn't mean anything. It's there. A lot of filmmaking comes down to the first, like, 5-6 minutes of a movie, where you can kind of tell, like, what the creators are sort of thinking. I'm not going to tangent much longer, but just to answer again the question is, I do think that they're dream realities. I think that it's converging and diverging is the way that every single character that describes the life stream describes the function of it as the river is that thoughts come together and then they separate, and they constantly do this. This is where Sephiroth's twisted version of this in like Reunion is taking advantage of that merging moment. I think that this is also what is happening with Zack and Biggs, and why eventually the sort of two connecting pieces are just Zack and Biggs, to the point where Biggs drops off and it's just Zack again. Is that these are all tangent little streams just kind of going off aimlessly without the sort of guidance of the planet's sort of, failsafe of this, which is the Whispers. So yes, in the live stream, but also tangible in the same way that our realities are tangible. These things are somehow find themselves back kind of into reality in the same way that Bugenhagen describes death and rebirth, hence kind of the title. So yes, bubble realities, yes, materia, yes, streams are very important to this and are manifesting these sort of separate realities, so to speak.
Great answers. That was the biggest one, so hopefully the rest of them are going to go by a little bit quicker than I feel like this was kind of front loaded, but we've kind of got our big thoughts out of the way now. So now we're going to move on to what I actually think is the most interesting, one of the most hard to sort of wrap your heads around questions that has been sort of unanswered, because we're all kind of on the same page with these worlds pretty clearly exist within the life stream in some way. So the question then becomes, how does that connect to the Beagle world? Is it the real world? Is it all a dream? Is it all real? And yes, Sleepezi.
I'm going to answer this question first. That's the only reason I'm raising my hand.
Okay, I'll go to you in a second after I give my little spiel here. So I wrote down two little lists, one of three things, one of four things, very short lists. One, my first list here is, I think there are three big possible answers to this question. And of course, if there's other ones, I would love to hear them. And I feel like the possible answers to the question is what is the Beagle world in relation to the alternate worlds? I think option one is all worlds are real and each world has its own life stream. That's basically the multiverse answer. Option two is that one world is real, presumably Beagle, and the rest are dreams / memories in the life stream. And option three is that all worlds in the re-trilogy are dreams / memories in the live stream. And to answer this question and figure out which of these, or a potential fourth option it is, we have to look at the evidence that Remake and Rebirth give us. And I've written down what I consider probably the four biggest pieces of evidence. And there's probably others. This is just what I jotted down in my rough thoughts. So number one, Cosmo Canyon NPC that SubTXT brought up. She is pretty straightforwardly telling us that her dead parents, she thinks that her dead parents are currently occupying a spiritual plane of existence post-death that is made up of a combination of real memories and dreams and nightmares, etc. Very weird if they were to put that in the game, the writers, and then be like, oh, it's not that. That was just like a random little nothing. So I think that's a pretty heavy evidence that a post-death spiritual plane of existence exists. And if they're not talking about the worlds we've seen, I guess it could be like Promised Land related or something, but it seems to line up with what we've seen. Evidence two, Sephiroth says, this is verbatim, the planet encompasses a multitude of worlds. Very sort of direct, but also strange way to phrase it. So when he says the planet, I assume he means the soul of the planet, the life stream, meaning the life stream encompasses these worlds. And if we were dealing with an actual multiverse, multiple timelines, parallel realities, they wouldn't be within the life stream because every one of those worlds would have its own life stream. And if you're saying it's that, but it's also in the life stream, then you got like life streams within life streams and sub life streams. And I think personally that gets very convoluted, and I really hope that's not the answer. Evidence number 3, Aerith touches the life stream underneath Cosmo Canyon and flashes in her mind over to Zack's world where he's touching her hand. Pretty direct statement. That world exists in the life stream that she just touched. And if it's like a multiverse thing, it's like she touched a sub life stream that's within another life stream that's in the multiverse and saw another sub life stream. Not a fan of that personally. And then 4 is what SubTXT brought up also, which is that Aerith has her moment where she says, let's just call it a dream. That's 4 pretty big statements that I think are very much not in line with multiversal ideas personally. And so my answer to the question is that I think the Beagle world is the real world. I think Destiny has been broken in the real world. And now, for whatever reason that we'll get into when we talk about the next question with the Harbinger and stuff, there are now all these potential bubble realities that could influence reality in various ways that I'm sure we'll get into. But I really hope the Beagle is the real world, because if they're all dream worlds, then you have the everything's a dream problem. Then it's like all of these are within the life stream, and then there's life streams within the life stream. I don't like it. I find it very hard to find a satisfying logical answer to fit all of this together if the Beagle world is not reality personally. So that is where I'm leaning right now with this. And now we can go to Sleepezi.
I regret raising my hand. There's a lot to say about that particular thing. I do think that the quickest way to summarize everyone's sort of what they've already said is that, for instance, all of the first game takes place in a bubble, which is literally created by the Whispers to contain the the breakage of Destiny, which is also something that Sephiroth says is it's only when you cross the threshold of Destiny as the party has that things like tangential universes in the way that they describe them start to happen. So there's that, but then there's also sort of the idea from that being the center, let's say, which I agree. I do think that the Beagle is sort of like the encompassing of everything. The river that is the planet, the life stream of the planet, is the Beagle as we know it from Remake. And there's I just want to continue to reference this thing that Nomura said, where it's like just like the idea of what the players thought about the game initially, or just Final Fantasy VII when they were revisiting it, and some of his thoughts about how people remembered it and didn't necessarily remember all the details correctly. I get that impression when looking at the different Beagles, is that it's like, well, it's a dog, but it's not the dog that I remember it being, but it's kind of like a Beagle. Maybe it was fuzzier, maybe it was a pug. I can't remember which. So all of that sort of makes sense as well, when also factoring in how the Whispers also changed along with our perception of the world. Is that originally they are one thing, this idea of this gray whisper, and now we have all of a sudden these extreme white and black colors. And one of the things that we know happened just from the introduction to the game is that somehow Cloud severed or sundered Destiny. Is that is sort of this singularity moment where everything is one, kind of splits off into, and sundering meaning to split apart. And then the constant references through the characters talking about how fragmented they were after this one pivotal moment in their lives. Barrett mentions it during right before his fight with Dyne. I was going to say Clark. Cloud also references it to Tifa after her live stream sequence. It all sort of fits together as this used to be the world as a whole, and now is being split apart so that it can come back together as something different. That's, I think, ultimately what this was all about anyway, is to sort of de-thread the life stream to then reorganize it in a way that sort of suited the logic of perhaps the villain as well. I also want to very quickly mention the poster for the game and then the box art, which is you have Tifa, you have Aerith, or you have consequently Cloud and Zack, and then Sephiroth always in the middle. Is that what my interpretation of that always was Tifa and Cloud were the representation of the life stream's memories. That's because Nibelheim is very center to that concept. It is essentially the grounding aspect of that idea. Dreams, obviously, being Aerith in Rebirth, taking the forefront of that, being like, this is my dream, and then also Zack also just representing that idea fully in Crisis Core and in Rebirth. And then there's a line in Cosmo Canyon that is also spoken right before the Dreams dialogue from Tifa herself, because there is an injection to the original concept of how the life stream functions in this dialogue, where Bugenhagen essentially is explaining that once the life stream gets used up, it dissipates. It just no longer exists. And the music concludes, and then Tifa's like, well, what if it doesn't go away? And I think that has been on my mind quite a bit too. So I know that this was sort of against what you were interested in, but I do think that there are multiple layers of life stream sort of overlaying each other. And I think the reason why I bring this up is because, as Tifa says, what if it doesn't go away? There's a slight melody of Sephiroth's that starts to play at the beginning of her discussion. And it's that, to me, and what we know from lore, is the negative life stream is something that overtakes life as it perishes and turns it into a weapon that Sephiroth uses. So I think that all of this is true. One, real world, memories, dreams, but then also the negative life stream, which I think is what is creating this sort of curveball event in everyone's head, where it's like, what is happening? Because it just seems like there's so many concepts layered on top of each other, and it's super confusing, but you just have to know what you're looking for. So that's sort of how my brain separates all of that stuff. Sorry for taking over the conversation.
No, you're good. Great answer. Who wants to go next?
I can jump in. I have a pretty quick answer, I think, and it's because my evidence is dangerously straightforward in the world of Final Fantasy VII, because it can spin out and everything. But it's fairly simple to me, my conception of it. Like I said, dangerously so, because it'll probably come back to bite me in the ass when third game comes around, that it becomes far more confusing. But I think the simplest answer is that the Beagle world is the main reality, the prime reality. And I think the very simple piece of evidence that I point to is just based on a question of, well, an observation and then a question. Observation being, why is it that we don't really see the Whispers intervene or exist really in any other world?
And it's like, what would be the point of the Whispers in a dream anyway? Yeah. It's like their whole utility was to like keep reality on track, in my opinion.
Yeah. So them only really existing in the Beagle verse.
Yes.
And Sephiroth concerning himself really only with the Beagle verse. I mean, that's where he shows up, that's where he instigates things, that's where he creates the portal to the singularity. To me, that is the ultimate, kind of thing that's those are the stakes, right? That is the what I believe the reality he is trying to remake, right? Is like, that is the one singular timeline, and he's trying to mess with things so much to the fact that when things would be merged, they would be merged in such a state of chaos that he could then sort of change fate and reality and bend it to his will and all of that. So I think simple answer, Beagleverse is the real reality. That's where all the stakes are.
Yeah, I think
And
it's just
the-
like it's just an Occam's razor thing. It's like it's just the simplest answer. I think it opens up such a can of worms if it's not this personally, but I could be wrong. We'll see.
That's really
Okay. So I guess my answer is yeah, it's the main world, but it's the world. So it's the world, right? But if you take the live stream away from the world, it is lifeless. So even though these pocket bubbles are within the live stream is the power by which all life and things manifest in the real world. So it's the core mechanic by which all things happen in the Beagle world is this concept of a collective unconscious of live stream memory. It's how we're able to get, holy, between worlds. It's how things are able to manifest physically. It's because within the live stream is the power to manifest anything, and most importantly, life. Right. So it is the motor by which there's life. The
Or to
difference
die is a
between
bad thing.
being able to be within it and consciously engage in it, and being outside of it, as an observer, is demonstrated very simply in Tifa's live stream sequence. That's the difference between being in a dream and seeing from the perspective of within the live stream, and being an outsider, being affected by the live stream. So Tifa's not fully in the live stream, but she's just exposed to it. So she's having this, sort of transitive experience with the memories of what's going on. So I think the distinction between the way that Aerith and Cloud are experiencing, the live stream, one is like this very, immersive, reality bending experience, and one is this, sort of halfway step, tells us everything that we need to know about the nature of the Beagleverse. And that's that it's on top and the live stream is functioning within.
A palette to be dipped in with brush.
I have to jump in so quickly is that you beautifully described the Tifa live stream sequence. In the sense that and this is exactly how the game continues to address this idea of layering of realities, is that, and I'm telling you guys, if you just go back and play the game, just like even listen to audio cues, you'll notice that the developers are very clear about layers of reality. But in the Tifa live stream sequence, Tifa is seeing the live stream as is. Only when Sephiroth stabs the weapon and pierces the materia that she is in, and she's exposed to the full-fledged Mako, is she then seeing all of the people around her physically. She's only hearing these sounds in the live stream. Once she's exposed to the full thing, she sees Zengen, she sees the doctor, she sees Aerith in there, which is also very telling. There's another reason why she's there other than her being a memory, obviously, but the idea is of this World of White area is that it is directly linked to a ton of imagery that we're seeing used by the White Whispers that are directly related to Aerith. So you have this language of the game illustrating to you in very subtle ways, but in very clear and intentional ways, different layers of existence that all expose you to the meaning and reason for them being there. Zach's role might not seem very obvious as an instance of that, because I think he's just the most blatant outlier of what is new, and he's definitely taking the brunt of what the fuck is going on with the story shit. All of his story is like that, but the point that is illustrated so flatly is that life needs to continue to to grow, and that is what Zach's role is. That is also what needs to happen with the live stream. It's what needs to happen with the character's growth. Yeah, sorry, it's just very inspiring thing to say.
I just need to jump in and say I had such a flashback to college where Sleepezi is like, it's so clear. It's like a professor as I'm like staring at a book, confused about a concept, and it's like, it's right there. It's very clear.
It's right there. Just so many people do a better job of explaining it than I do.
Is that everyone? Are we ready for the next question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So I find this to be the hardest question to find a compelling answer to. I've had some like rough ideas, but mostly I kind of have no idea. So it's a two-part question. And the first part's kind of easy, but it's the second part that's the hard part. So the question is, what role did the Harbinger of Fate play? And why did defeating it create the alternate worlds as is implied? So it seems pretty clear that the point of the Harbinger of Fate, the big dark side that we defeated at the end of Remake, was to basically give the Whispers their prerogatives, their instructions to make sure that the flow of time was fixed, and in OG FF7 happens every time because that's a sequence of events that leads to the planet flourishing and Sephiroth being defeated. And then when you defeat the Harbinger of Fate, the Whispers now have no master, and Sephiroth's like, scoop, and now Sephiroth controls the Whispers, and maybe Aerith controls some white ones, yada yada. But Sephiroth says in Rebirth, what's the term? He says when the bounds of fate are breached, new worlds are born.
Yes.
Pretty straightforward. He's Sephiroth. He could be lying, but seems like an info dump scene, so I'm kind of just taking it at face value. Plus, as soon as you defeat the Harbinger of Fate, Zack's fate changes. So, seems pretty clear that defeating the Harbinger of Fate has something to do with these, what we all seem to agree are life stream worlds, now manifesting and being able to be potentially drawn from to override reality with merge worlding and whisper powers and stuff, which is kind of the next question. And I don't really know the answer to this at all. If it turns out that the bubble worlds, the dream worlds are not POV, not character centric, like if it was just streams of the planet, then I could see, oh, well, Destiny is breached, and now the planet has memories of infinite time loops, meaning all potentials. But I do think they're POV worlds, in which case it's like, I guess they could be memories of multiple time loops from POVs, but I think that's kind of like convoluted. And so I'm more curious to just sit and listen to what y'all have to say about this. Why did defeating the Harbinger of Fate create these alternate worlds?
I raised my hand, but I feel like I'm just biting off the entire subject. So somebody else jump in, and I'll jump in after.
Although it might not be the most satisfying answer, a little bit, only in terms of, as we've talked about, like, what are the worlds, right? And I think we all had a definition and description of them that were compelling, right? And understand that. For example, that they are memories that live on and sort of create maybe even bubble realities in which, whether it happened or not, it's legitimized by the live stream. And, I kind of understand that. Why we had to defeat the Harbinger of Fate happen or manifest, it just seems like if the live stream just treats memories this way, then it should be treated that way regardless of what happens to the Harbinger of Fate. But it seems like there is some Pandora's box that is opened by defeating the Harbinger of Fate. And so I don't really have a great answer as to why why the Harbinger of Fate was there, what exactly it was sort of like stopping. Potentially just making sure that actions happen the way they were supposed to, and thus limiting the number of spin out worlds. But I don't know. So I guess I might have a smarter answer after these other two guys talk.
Do you want to go, Clark?
No, I want you to go.
Okay. So I think one of the most telling parts of the game is the singularity in remake, because the devs did end up talking about it quite a bit after several Ultimanias, and they separate after that the Whisper Harbinger is defeated, that you have the conflict with Sephiroth that represents the world of the life stream and the world of Meteor. And I've been very keyed into that particular conversation, like from before the idea of, you know, multiple worlds, but as subtext sort of already led on, and I completely agree with it, which is that the sort of hub of the battle is the Beagle timeline / world. But if you guys play Remake again, as soon as the Whisper Harbinger is defeated, a white wind appears and teleports the party to the pool of water that they end up standing on, which Sephiroth then confronts them in. Is as soon as the Whisper Harbinger is defeated, the sort of Pandora's box, I think, is opened, which is why I think that scene is so chaotic, is that this is sort of the center, the epicenter of multiple realities being created, or different directions, like sort of manifesting at this point. So it's sort of the meeting in the middle for then the convergence and divergence to happen. So this is one instance of convergence. I think another instance of convergence is also happens to be Aerith's death. So this also seemingly lands on emotional beats or moments of extreme importance for the characters, and how integral they are to the function of the rest of the world, because certain events have to happen in a certain way or play out in a certain way. So I think to answer the question is that Whisper Harbinger was exactly what we know the Whispers to be, is a gatekeeper to Aaron worlds being created. And once you cross the boundaries of fate, which is essentially defeating the Harbinger and passing the Destiny's crossroads, does that happen? So in order to do that, they had to beat the Whisper Harbinger to then sort of end up where they are. But in that same thought, then you have to start considering that Aerith and Sephiroth already seem to be able to defy the Whispers before the game even starts. Like, the Whispers can't touch Sephiroth. So one of the things that you can probably pick up from that is that they already have a sort of fateless heir to their sort of power, in terms of their, not their physical presence, but to their sort of presence in the life stream. So perhaps Sephiroth has already kind of crossed that boundary in a certain way, using something before, you know, the story of Remake starts, which might also lend itself to sort of looking at Tifa live stream sequence again, and also Aerith in Advent Children and after Rebirth.
Okay. I mean, I think I pretty much agree. I think for me, that we were baited into breaking the memories of the planet. That we were that the live stream is the mechanism by which the planet protects itself, and the Harbinger was a manifestation of the destiny mechanism of the live stream. Like, all life is governed by the live stream. So weapons are manifestation of the live stream. Life is a manifestation of the live stream. So the Whispers are that too. I do have a theory about who specifically the memories in the live stream of the Whispers are.
Take it home.
But we'll get there later. I think that the reason that the Harbinger looks like a weapon, has like weapon vibes, and why the Whispers have Cetra vibes, is because this is something the Cetra, as the arbiters of the live stream, as like the sort of end game evolutionary protector of the live stream, they were given this role to protect its future and everything like that. So I think that's why we see all the robed figures in the Temple of the Ancients and all the murals. Those robed figures end up getting emulated and overtaken and eaten by Jenova and corrupted when the Great Calamity comes down 2,000 years prior. And so I think the reason why the Sephiroth clones look like that is it's a perversion of that, and like a amelioration of that. And so I do think that there's some form of missing piece to the lore that will get explained in the third part. Like, they've set up exposition for what the Whisper Harbinger was, who the Cetra are in relationship to the Whispers, etc. And that once that happens, more of that will be clear. But from a functional perspective right now, defeating that Harbinger created these fractured worlds. And it's that simple. It created these fractured live stream segments. We broke apart the live stream because we broke apart a harbinger of it, and so once that cracked, and it made some of those bubble universes that were created, bubble live streams, ripe for the taking for Sephiroth. So that's my answer.
Yeah, I agree. There's a large chance that Part 3 is going to add a piece to the puzzle of the Harbinger, because as is, and I don't know if part of this is sort of like creative little retcons and stuff as far as what they have added to the lore with Rebirth, but initially Harbinger essentially just being the controller of the Whispers, it seems like there's got to be a little bit more to it. I'm very curious.
I definitely think just the preface that Rebirth is already set up, and even what Clark has already mentioned. We and I've mentioned this in prior videos myself, but the aspect of that conversation will come up during the weapon discussion, if anywhere, because there is very large correlations between those concepts, and it's almost naturally that even if they don't over-explain the Harbinger bit, which I think that it kind of exists fine, that you don't necessarily need to. All you need is just more concept of like the world function, and just knowing that the planet can manifest these sort of guardians to protect itself in one way or another. Will probably, I'm sure what they will probably do is they'll probably incorporate some familiar aspects of the Whispers designs and the Harbinger designs into the weapons to perhaps create that correlation a little bit better. That would be my guess.
That eyeball. All right, the next question, which is something I didn't really think about too much until recently, but I think is very interesting. And the question is, what is Sephiroth doing when he merges worlds? He uses the phrase merging worlds, and then we sort of see it happen. And I think the answer is pretty simple, personally. The Whisper's utility was to adjust destiny to how the planet or how their boss saw fit. Sephiroth is now their boss, so now Sephiroth uses the Whispers to adjust reality to his liking by dipping his paintbrush in the palette that is the dreams in the life stream. He has access to unlimited potential, and even though in Remake all the Whispers did was sort of physically adjust reality, like they fly over to Barrett and heal his wound, or they swarm Jessie and make her break her leg or whatever. But I guess in the hands of Sephiroth, he can now do a lot more with it, where he is able to basically be Freddy Krueger, pluck the nightmare, override reality with it, which will, a great example of that will be in the next question about the end of the game. But that's kind of my perspective on what Sephiroth means when he merges worlds. I think it's kind of a weird way to phrase it, but I think he's just taking all of the dark events and overriding reality with those events to make the perfect dark timeline, essentially. Which one do you want to go first?
Sounds good. Do you want me to?
No, you don't have to if you don't want to. I was just thinking to myself that I think we're gonna find ourselves in a very similar spot with this, but all of us.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Why don't you go for it? I think you can kind of probably sail this one because I think it's the one we're probably the most in agreement on.
Okay. Yeah. So I think one of the things that you've made sort of a correlation between like the Whisper. There is sort of a Whisper Harbinger aspect of like Sephiroth now. Also, just MJ Gallagher, shout outs to him, pointed out the similarities between the songs that are used between the mention of Rebirth and the Whisper Harbinger in remake soundtracks. So there is some correlation to this idea of like what Sephiroth is in that aspect, but the merging of worlds seems to be the converging point of realities, meaning that as Sephiroth is merging those worlds in the way that we see him opening up the sky, the sort of one layer of reality kind of collapsing in on one, but in order to strengthen the lifespan of another. So Sephiroth is taking these strands of the life stream, turning them into and using the negative life stream, as I'm sure that we will learn more about at some other point, but it's essentially just Sephiroth's life stream, his world. He's transforming the strands of the life stream into essentially, just like you mentioned, a dark timeline-esque version to continuously push things forward unnaturally. But I also think that a part of it is also Sephiroth also coming together and sort of reforming himself. So there's like this weird thing that's happening at the same time with like the Outer Worlds also mentioning Jenova also included in the reunion in the Temple of the Ancients, where he kind of makes mention that he will bring both the worlds and his mother together. And the idea is that as the worlds are connecting, Jenova is also kind of becoming more whole, but also Sephiroth is also becoming whole. And there's a really good visual example of this at the end where all of the characters are starting fighting Rebirth Sephiroth, but all of them seemingly have an effect on just the one, even though they're not in the same plane of reality. So as the worlds are converging, Sephiroth is also becoming whole with all of these things as well. So there's always this great thing about Final Fantasy VII that I love so much is that there is a pure function of the worlds, or a function of the planet, that is perfectly mirrored by Sephiroth's presence. So as this is a function of the world, it also has this negative connotation to it that Sephiroth is sort of mirroring in some really twisted, awful way. So I think that kind of answers the question. Maybe I don't think I did it as much justice, but that's sort of where my brain sits on it.
So do you want me to answer, Josh?
Yeah.
Okay. To me, I think what he means in a literal sense is fairly nihilistic, which is just that he wants to consume all the worlds, and that is his concept of merging them, right? I do think there are layers to his motivations that involve loneliness. I do think that he does want, he wants at least one person with him, in this universe of loneliness, and that does seem to be Cloud. There does seem nothing that I'm reading from any of their interactions on that subject is that he is trying to trick him into being his partner, sailing the cosmos together. I do think he genuinely wants that. That's my read on that, but that's all subtextual. I think he's consuming all the worlds. He might leave Cloud around for reasons. It seems, maybe it's a rivalry thing. Maybe it's something else. Whatever it is, he probably needs him somehow. Maybe it's the infinite potential stuff. Whatever it is, though I do think merging of worlds means that if Genova, or he through Genova, or Genova through him, however their synergistic relationship works, is literally consuming these worlds, they mean that inside him these worlds are merging. And when you Genova Life Clinger, is a great, I think a really good localization for this, because I think it sort of recognizes what Genova's role is in this process, right? It's the wrong kind of immortalization, the not through something cyclical, but through something that consumes. So consumerism, versus responsible use. It's just more of those Final Fantasy themes, dichotomized with each other, right? So that's the way that I see worlds merge. I think it's pretty simple.
I may reverse course just a little bit, because there's one thing about the Harbinger of Fate thing that I wanted to speak on, but
sure.
the internet conspired against me.
Right.
There was something interesting that BabySeal said that reminded me of something I heard on Prof. Noctis's most recent podcast, where because it was about why defeat the Harbinger of Fate, and there was one thing that he said that he read from like a YouTube comment actually recently, where the live stream is essentially it controls reality, right? Like it's sort of and so like by disrupting the guardian, I guess, of reality, the guardian of the main live stream, it opens it up so that the memories of the core live stream that defines reality essentially can be altered, right? And talked about how Genova seemingly messes with your conception of reality as an individual person, right? We saw that happen with Sephiroth. We've seen that happen with Cloud, obviously. And so what if Genova, once the guardrails are taken off the Prime live stream, could it influence and manipulate the memories of the planet itself, and in that case change reality as we know it? And so I thought that was an interesting thought, and perhaps the reason why the Harbinger of Fate had to be removed. And I guess it then plays into the question of what is the purpose of reuniting the worlds. And I think it's because Sephiroth and maybe Genova together are trying to recreate the conditions of reality, and then bring it to a point that all of these sort of errant worlds, all of these like thoughts and dreams and whatever that are astray in the live stream, kind of get all brought together into one sort of new reality. The Sephiroth's own promised land, as the developers have talked about, they've talked about him wanting to create the promised land. And so him trying to create one final reality that he fully controls. And by reuniting all of the worlds, it ends them and ends all disparate possibilities of what could be, and puts it all into the final thing that he can impact. So I think that's the intention, is to break it all open so that he can bring it all back to the one thing that he wants and that he fully controls.
These are very interesting answers. It definitely makes me think there's that other element, that other variable that we're kind of waiting to be revealed. But I really like the idea of like Harbinger is more than just director of whispers. Like that, if that was one of its utility, one of its responsibilities, and that it's actually more of a guardian of the life stream's concept of predestination or whatever. I think that's pretty interesting. I was gonna say something else, but I forget what it is.
I can let you think about it. I can chime in for a second too. I do think that that's like Clark mentioned it, and Subtext also sort of was touching on it, is that there's a lot to be said about just Cloud and Sephiroth's relationship, but just knowing that in the future, Sephiroth sort of is bound to Cloud's memories in a very specific way. I do think that in a very twisted way, Sephiroth has a kinship to Cloud because literally his memories are what keep him alive. And I think that in some very odd, sentimental way, there's like almost confusion in Sephiroth because of that concept. But we even see him in the live stream kind of guarding these memories in the Tifa live stream sequence. So I think for me, and going off of what SubTXT said, I think that what Sephiroth ultimately wants is for like Cloud to forget exactly who he is, so that Sephiroth can kind of just, you know, do what he wants to do to sort of convince him of his reality and the reality that he wants. And that definitely hinges also on him believing it so that he can also create it and manifest it. I do think that kind of starts with Cloud though. So I think off of SubTXT's point is that I do think that Sephiroth is going to, like we know in the third act of Final Fantasy VII OG, start to target specifically these memories of Cloud and his perception of reality. And that will ultimately kind of be the inception of what eventually gets Sephiroth what he wants. And also there's a line of dialogue that was taken away from the OG, like sort of hinting at the fact that what he wants is that sort of singularity, that oneness with all of the live stream to be dictated, sort of God, basic I want to be God mentality, but how that works and manifests in Seven's world is very different, I think, which we've kind of seen. So
I remember what I was going to say. I was just going to sort of bring it into a thematic direction for a second, which is pretty obvious, but regardless of the logic of all of this, of how it happened, why it happened, etc., with the Harbinger and Destiny and stuff, it was really a thematic inciting incident that quite literally just unlocked the potential of human will, which is the most Final Fantasy, and especially Final Fantasy 16 theming that you can have. Like, defeating God with the power of friendship is really just a funny way of saying human will compounded into itself can accomplish crazy goals, such as stopping global warming / the planet being destroyed. And so no matter what is going on with all of this, the ultimate like thematic purpose of everything is that Cloud, when he like comes into his true self and through the power of the support of everyone around him, they will be able to thematically dip into these worlds of untapped human will potential and use that as a possible literal white weapon to defeat the odds that be. And I think personally that's what's thematically going on with the entire inciting incident of this trilogy, which is defeating Destiny and then having untapped potential to do whatever you want with. And if anyone has any more thoughts on that, go for it. If not, we will move on to the next question, which is, when Cloud briefly saved Aerith from being stabbed, what actually happened, and how does that tie in to these worlds? I initially thought that Cloud was having a mental breakdown, and I don't really think that anymore. Now that I've sort of sorted through all these questions, and I put these questions in order to kind of lead us to this, as not that this is the most important question, but like we needed to address what Sephiroth is doing, how the Whispers play into it, in order to get to the point where my perspective on this moment is that Cloud actually did save Aerith in that moment. I think Cloud, who's super down on himself, doesn't think he has the potential to do this kind of stuff, actually succeeds at saving Aerith. And afterwards she says, "I see what you did there, thank you." I think it fits so perfectly that if Sephiroth is the master of the Whispers And Sephiroth has the ability and is constantly overriding reality with alternate versions of reality that are darker. That Cloud would actually succeed at saving Aerith, and then you see a wash of whispers just flood across the screen, and then boom, Sephiroth's preferred outcome has now been swapped in. He has merged a dream world where Aerith has died into the real world as a way to get what he wants, but also as a way to like break Cloud even further. He's like, you thought you saved her? Guess what? Boom, it's worse now. You had hope, I took it away. So that's my personal current interpretation of that scene, is that Cloud saved Aerith, period, and Sephiroth used his whisper powers to override reality with a more negative version of it. And I'm sure there's going to be a couple of very different opinions on this, so I'm curious to hear what y'all think.
SubTXT, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me? I just wanna
Yes,
make
yeah,
sure.
sound great.
You're all
Yeah.
good.
So the thing, so okay. So as I said, when we talked about what are the worlds, I do think they are, the dreams, the sort of like memories, lived experience, memories, as well as memories of things that didn't happen, and that the live stream treats equally. And I do think that so what happens there is Cloud has a belief that he intercepts the attack, blocks it, parries it, exactly what we saw, right? And in that moment, his belief is that he does it and he's successful. Obviously, in the reality that we all live in, or the entire party lives in, that is not what happened. In the reality that we all exist in the Beagle verse, Aerith is killed. So, but that said, as I've talked about, and I think Sleepezi mentioned earlier, because the live stream treats these things equally, the lived realities and the sort of unrealized dreams, and it in turn makes them real in sort of like equal ways. And so there's been this conversation, right, of like, what is the real thing? And we keep talking about this game, we keep talking about this trilogy in terms of binaries, right? Like, did Zack live, or is he just in the live stream? And then we end up getting into Rebirth, and we all had we all landed on one side or the other for the most part before Rebirth came out. It was either this or that. And when Rebirth comes around, we end up all finding out it's actually both. Like, it all happens within the live stream, but it is also real in some very real way. Kind of brought to life, I think the most clear evidence is being able to take the white materia from Aerith's dream and bringing it to our reality, passing it from one existence to another, one world to another. So much so that Cloud is then holding the empty materia in our real world at the end. That materia he should not have, and he got it from some dream reality in the live stream. Yet it is just as real in his fingertips on that hill as it was when Aerith passed it to him in her dream. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I like to bring it to Final Fantasy X for a second. Like people seem to make a big argument about this white materia as like a big proof of something, but like I don't see why there would be any issue between a dream becoming real. Like, they've already done this with Final Fantasy X. Dream Zanarkand was basically a physical reality being summoned, and then things from that dream can come into the real world, and it's fine. It's just like they have a spiritual origin. So I've never really understood why it would matter whether something is real or not if it just came from a fake place. Now it's real. Like it's a fantasy game. They've done this. I think that all coincides pretty organically, personally.
Yeah, I mean, I have such a vague recollection of Final Fantasy X, but also take your word for it. But I mean, I guess that's also what Tidus is, right? Like, Tidus technically, exists and he's with everyone, and then has to go at the very end. That's about that's about the extent that I remember of FF7.
Yeah, there's some very interesting like analysis. Like Resident Arc has a very long series, very in-depth, very good series breaking down Final Fantasy X, and they point out some very interesting things I never even thought about. And they basically say that the game is pitching Dream Zanarkand, which is where Tidus is from, Dream Tidus. They're pitching that as being the exact same as when you summon what an Aeon is what they're called in 10. You can summon an Aeon from a spiritual realm. It's real. It breathes fire on the enemy and they die. You could summon whatever else from that world. And considering it's from the same writers, it seems like there's a lot of parallels to how they're treating these live stream worlds here.
Yeah. And so how that all relates to what happens at the end. So I think Cloud conceives of himself saving Aerith, her living on, and that becomes a dream reality, that's kind of manifested and owned by him in some way.
Do you think Go ahead.
Sorry. And then I think the biggest clue as to, because the conversation has been, well, does it matter, right? Like, is it even real? All we just discussed. And I think what makes it even more real is that we have a third party view that dream. And the third party is Tifa. Because I think when Tifa runs up to the altar, we see the flash and the Genova flashing kind of thing happens. And we see bloody Aerith and Aerith without any blood. And when it's the thing that's discussed in the NPC dialogue that has potentially been overlooked is that it says that what if, like the woman's theory is, what if when you come in contact with the spiritual energy, you are able to peer through the looking glass. And then in the Japanese, it says, if you accidentally come into contact with the live stream, what if you could see into other worlds?
Yeah, so that makes sense to me for Tifa. Is it just because Cloud has Mako in him that he's able to do this? Like, when recently did Cloud come into contact with a massive amount of live stream energy?
It's not Cloud. Tifa came into contact with the live stream in Chapter 9.
But Tifa wasn't even there when Cloud deflected the flash to this other world that you're saying and deflected.
He's not talking about that.
He's talking about
he's talking about a little bit after, yeah.
Yeah.
Where, I
thought you were saying that when Tifa has those flashes, she's having flashes just like Cloud was able to flash to this dream world where he saved her.
No, I'm just saying that, because she runs up to the altar, flashes appear. Mm-hmm. It's looking from a third-person perspective at Cloud and Aerith from Tifa's viewpoint. Like, we see her face, it centers on the scene of Cloud and Aerith. The sort of flashes happen where we see the blood and we don't see and we see no blood, and then it cuts back to Tifa's face, confused. And so I think because of her exposure to the live stream, she has latent sort of ability to it's infected her in some way to the point that she can occasionally see through the veil, right? And so I think she's
that connection to the Cosmo Canyon NPC. That's very interesting.
So I think she's seeing Cloud's imagined world, but she can't see it all the time. It's also Cloud's, dream. That's why later on it's a momentary thing, and she doesn't even know what to make of it.
But what is this live stream Cloud dream? How is that? Where is that coming from? How is that a thing? And why did Cloud see himself there in this moment?
Because it's an unrealized dream, right? It's an unrealized desire of the heart, as the Cosmo Canyon NPC put it, right? Like, he saw himself potentially doing it. He believed himself able to do it. And so the live stream treated that as legitimate, but it's not in the prime reality. It's just a conception in his mind that now lives in the live stream and could potentially access at some point.
Why did it happen? Why did it happen at this moment and only to Cloud and only right now?
I don't know the exact answer, but it just seems like as much of a breaking of fate as any other breaking of fate that we've seen throughout the game.
I do think that there's definitely some distinguishing aspects to that scene that the game has very specifically laid out to sort of give us some context. For instance, I think it has already been brought up that there's a certain authorship of what we're seeing and how we're seeing it. So in Zach's reality, we're only dealing with, you know, non Beagle related sort of tangential worlds. And when those are happening, Zach has a vast influence on those things because he's not flowing with the entire consciousness of all of the live stream. But when Cloud tries to author his own sort of version of what he wants, and just jumping off of this, just sort of, I guess, because we're kind of talking about Aerith's death, based off of the question is that I think multiple authors are saying no, that this is not, you can't compete just one person to sort of author reality. So I think Aerith and Sephiroth both desire this conclusion, and also the game has hinted at the fact that Aerith has to die. It is a consistent, a constant of all realities via Loveless, that all roads lead to her death in some aspect. So, and even to throw in the horrible line that Red 13 says is that like a part of this is meant to happen. Like what is happening at the Temple of the Ancients is supposed to happen, and intentionally done so by Aerith. So because that was sort of an answer to that, to the discussion at large, I'm going to kind of just go back to who I really think is authoring that choice is Aerith. Mm-hmm. I think Aerith is the one, it's not Sephiroth. I think the reason why we feel that it's Sephiroth is because Aerith is using similar tactics as Sephiroth would to help Cloud rather than manipulate him. So one of these things that happens is once we've beaten Sephiroth and we're sort of introduced back into the scene where Aerith is dead, a white whisper passes over the camera, meaning that we are transitioning out of a Sephiroth world into a authored Aerith sort of perception of reality, or whatever you want to think of the white whispers as, or whoever is dictating that. One of the things that happens during this exact scene is that all of the party vanishes. So the reason that that's important is because that world, that white world, is now removing people who could influence Cloud into having to deal with this moment. But because it's a white world thing and an Aerith thing, that gets a little confusing, because the way that Sephiroth secludes Cloud is by literally trying to damage his relationships at a fundamental level. So he's gone after Tifa in this, and now and he's gone after his like other parts of his identity in the past. But the reason why this is super important is because Sephiroth, even though Aerith is doing this to protect Cloud, it puts Sephiroth in a very he has the advantage now, because Aerith is also creating this reasonable doubt that Sephiroth can use to paint a picture to kind of manifest his reality into a more certainty later. So even though like Aerith is able to shroud this event in mystery for now, it just seems like Sephiroth is just going to take full advantage of Cloud's sort of cluelessness that he's kind of been put into, for good reason, because if she hadn't done it, and because of all the work that Sephiroth had done up until that point, he would have broke, and that would have just instigated Sephiroth's plan to sort of fruition, I think, towards the end. It's sort of how she showed up at the end to begin with, is that at that point it was just him trying to get literally everyone out of Cloud's head. Zack showed up, he got rid of him, and now it's just Sephiroth and him, and then Aerith comes in to save him one last time, and then that's it. Now that's it.
I'm open to all these possibilities. Personally, I'm not really sure how Aerith would be able to use any powers, whisper powers, whatever, to give a human a delusion inside their mind. I feel like the Occam's razor, when you already have Dream Daddy Sephiroth controlling the whispers to override reality with alternate versions, I feel like the simplest answer is just he saved Aerith and Sephiroth changed it. I don't know if that's actually what happened, but I feel like I'm not really sure where Aerith would get a power like that. Also, while either you respond to that or Clark potentially gives his answer, I'm going to step out of the room for... Oh, Subtext is back. I'm going to step out of the room for 1 minute while y'all continue, but I can still hear you, and I'll be back in just a couple
Got it.
seconds.
Can you
I
all
was
hear
just
me
gonna
real
say,
quick?
Yeah, we can hear you.
you're
So
totally back.
yeah,
go for it.
I do have an answer. I do think that there the way that all consciousness is shared in the live stream. It is a manifestation of the live stream. The fact that there are individual consciousness does not mean that the live stream would have any any barrier in between it. We see a lot of live stream capable, Mako capable things affect people's current consciousness. We see, Cloud getting flashes of the future when he touches people, etc. in Remake. So I don't think there's actually any barriers, without knowing the full mechanics of the live stream. That said, the reason I think that Aerith is the one that is actualizing that reality where Cloud saved her is because that's when the prayer happens. Like that. I think that is the role of the white materia. Like the white materia, holy, all that stuff is still this amorphous, functional thing. It does more than we know yet. So does Meteor, and they're adding this element of dichotomization between black and white. And I think it's because there are more mechanics hidden behind there. The reason why I think it's specifically Aerith, I think that is, there's a bunch of dialogue that points to how different time works in the live stream. I do think that from a causal POV, so like not temporal but non-temporal causation sort of perspective, so the originating event of Aerith's consciousness in the live stream, I actually think that starts the moment
Right
that
there.
she dies right there.
Yeah.
So the Aerith that we see in the dream sequence has already died and been being chased through these errant worlds by Sephiroth, and that it was still a play of hers to feed on the desires of Cloud to save her in that moment. Because Sephiroth very clearly responds to Aerith in the white space during that fight, praising her for her behavior here, because it's clear that she has countered his movement in this. His movement was to bring on despair onto Cloud and break Cloud, and it seems like this was a counter by Aerith. To me, that's the way that I have interpreted this scene for a long, long time. And so I think that it is in fact Aerith that is materializing this errant world where she survives, and that this is the birth of live stream Aerith, which we see throughout. So far we've seen her in different places and different times within Remake and Rebirth now. So I do think that that's the beginning of Omni Aerith, is that moment. Is the moment where Cloud actualizes this desire. And I think he doesn't have the ability to do that because he's not a Cetra, but Aerith with the white materia does, and that's probably a function of an amorphous function of the white materia, and mobilizing the white whispers, etc. But they all seem to agree, in this kind of Looper mentality. By the way, I did want to say I thought Looper was fantastic. That is one thing I'll say.
Yes.
So yeah.
I haven't seen it since it came out. I literally don't even remember it.
To quickly follow up on that with a question, Clark.
Yeah.
So, because you linked it to the white materia, and I do think I remember in the original game there was a thing like when you go back to the Forgotten Capital with Boog and Hagen, and you see the vision of the white materia, and it talks about it responds to the prayer, but it's kind of unexpected in the way that it does respond to the prayer, right? Like we don't know how it responds exactly.
Right.
I don't know if this is what you were saying, but the way I interpreted what you were saying was, in her prayer, she talks about protecting her friends, right? Like take care of them, or whatever she says.
Yes.
So is the manifestation of this reality, this dream, kind of Holy's response to that prayer, in some ways trying to protect Cloud, trying to protect reality from being reunited by Sephiroth? Is that what you were getting at?
100%.
Yeah. That's
Well
interesting.
put.
I think that is actually exactly where I think we've talked about this before in other streams, but this is where this circles back to the original game and Sephiroth trapping this in the heart of the planet, is this thing that Aerith is summoning. So I have been just of the belief that we're just working our way back to sort of like the structure that Remake sort of put out, where you have a group of people who are trying to save the planet, and there's this evil force that is sort of essentially taking control of an asset that needs to be freed, and then it becomes Operation Save Aerith at the end. And that is ultimately what happens in Final Fantasy VII, is that it's like, let's go free her memories, essentially, which is what they sort of start to ponder and question, is what Holy is sort of the last like sort of effort of Aerith. Her dream in the context of Rebirth is what Holy is creating. And I think that that's sort of going to semi-swap out of the discussion with Sephiroth and the party at the very end of the game, where he says, instead of it being Aerith's memories, it's going to be these are Aerith's dreams that we're trying to save, because it's bigger than the concept of memory at this point. This is what will eventually kind of be the turning point in people's heads of, is this a remake or is this semi-sequel? It's her dreams rather than the memory of.
I have another follow-up. Sorry.
Go for it.
And
then we'll get to the last question after.
The only because I don't know the answer, but I'm just chasing down questions at this point. Because I really like the theory of it being this thing that was activated by Aerith. I guess a question is, in the final fight where Aerith comes back and fights with Cloud, she seems to address him and say, I saw what you did back there, thank you. I'm just curious what you all think that means, or what was meant by that question. Like, what is it that
were you in the call when I mentioned that, or were you MIA at that point? Well, based on my current very loose theory that because Sephiroth has the power of the Whispers to override reality with alternate darker versions, it seems pretty straightforward that Cloud saved Aerith, and Sephiroth was like, you got a little hope there? Well, I'm gonna rip it away now. Uses the Whispers. I think they just literally cover the screen at that point. And then he's like, you know what? I actually stabbed her. You failed because you're awful at everything and you'll never save anybody, yada yada. And then when she says thank you, I think she means thank you for literally saving me. That's it.
I mean, I think that what he's thanking her for, as I saw what you did back there, was her thanking Cloud for having that dream. For having that dream of saving her, because I think it allowed her to manifest her power in that situation. And it is specifically Sephiroth responding to her when he says, I underestimated you. Because at the end of this, Cloud still does not believe he failed. We're not going into part 3 with Cloud, with Sephiroth successfully convincing Cloud that he was unsuccessful, you know. So that's where I'm at. I think there's a relationship between the two decisions, but what Aerith is thanking Cloud for is the desire to save her, you know.
I'm trying to lean heavily into the Occam's Razor answers for simplicity, but this is a Nomura Nojima joint, so
Yeah.
Occam's Razor may not apply.
I think
Yeah, and you have to apply it to both statements. You have to apply Sephiroth's response to Aerith and Aerith's response to Cloud. Like, you have to, what's the simplest answer for both? Can they both be true somehow? And I think the only way you can make both of those answers be true together via Occam's Razor is to have this, somewhat unsatisfying idea that it's both of them. It's both Cloud's desire and, perhaps Aerith's power, or Aerith's prayer or desire that have created this possibility. And I do think there's a lot to say that this is a response to Sephiroth from Aerith. And I do think this is the beginning of Omni Aerith. But that's a wild swing, I'm sure.
Yeah, I agree with the Omni Aerith thing for sure.
I also think that there is an interesting thing to take note of is that once Aerith appears in the sort of Sephiroth world to save Cloud in that moment, to step in, is that the last time we saw the space that Aerith manifests is that it is plentiful with water, and in the final fight it's just pools, like sort of separated, just sort of a lot less of that there. So it I think in my head is assumed that Aerith is using just the slightest of the rest of her influence in that moment before sort of the divergence is what I do think is happening before the separation of worlds again, to try and interfere and sort of block Sephiroth's sort of, his plan. But I agree with Clark entirely, which is that it's the fact that there's something very powerful in Final Fantasy VII about, like, again, going back to just Final Fantasy in general, is like this power of will, and for Cloud to even be spurred on so fervently to respond that way, that is his strength. That is also what ends up killing Sephiroth in Advent Children, is the same feeling that Cloud is having. So I think, and this also comes back to lines that happened in Remake, is that Cloud's like, I'm coming for you, and she's like, thank you. And it's not that he may succeed, it is the fact that she is appreciating Cloud for who he is and the trueness of that character to his actual self. So yes, with all of the other strings attached to what that means. Yeah.
Good answers. All right, we've arrived at the final question. And that question
Only been 6 hours. We've gotten there.
Looks like we're going to wrap up at around 2.5 hours. I think that's pretty good.
Perfect.
Yeah.
2.5 hour over is fine.
All right, final question. How will these worlds play into part 3, aka what is the ultimate point here? And I'll let y'all go first on this one. Subtext.
Sure. I mean, it's
Good luck.
yeah, it's a meaty question. It's something that, like, indirectly is, I think, a kind of what my next video is about in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's also like the least, like it could be anything. Like who knows is basically the answer to this one, but best guesses.
I mean, I think the weirdly enough, it is both extremely new but extremely true to the original in some ways.
Mhm.
Because the Cloud has, in the original, probably the most memorable, impactful moment that we all know that developers keep talking about is the live stream sequence, right?
Mhm.
Where Cloud needs to, wrestle with what is real, and the things that he believes of himself in the real world before he goes into the live stream sequence in his mind are very real. Like, he believes he is a soldier in the original just as much as he believes that he saved Aerith in Rebirth. You know, like these are false beliefs that he has come to believe are incredibly real and have an impact on how he sort of interacts and moves through the world. And then in the Whirlwind Maze, that sense of reality is shattered, right? And that like his belief system is called into question. And so I think because we are all coming into this, or a lot of, at least 50% of the player base is coming in with that base knowledge from the original game, the devs have sort of accounted for that by making a new thing his false reality. And that new thing being what he believes happened at the Forgotten Capital. So that, you know, that can then be shattered and we can learn the truth of it, and we can sort of it's a new version. It's basically like, rather than him just having a false belief about what happened in Nibelheim, he's literally having and we as players are having a false belief of what just happened at the end of Rebirth. And so it's sort of playing with that and having to sort of come to a belief system around like, what is then real? What do I accept as the final sort of version of reality? And I think, and I feel like I'm not explaining it too well without sort of a lot of other context, but essentially, once he gives up his identity as a soldier, his self-belief that he was a soldier in the original, that then goes away. It's no longer real. And so I think when he has to come to terms with what actually happened to Aerith, that thing that seems to be real, just like he thought he was a soldier, the reality where Aerith sort of lives on will also have to be put to rest. And we will all have to move forward with reality as it is, right? Like history, like what does Aerith say at the Temple of the Ancients? She says, the past is set in stone, right? But the future, even if it's written, can be changed. And so the past, in this case, we are now past the Forgotten Capital. So what happened there happened. Like, it is now set in stone. Even if it temporarily lives on in some errant sort of worlds conceived by Cloud or by the life stream or by Aerith, whatever, it will eventually have to sort of like go off into the ether. And the rest of the game will then have to, I think, be about, so the end point of part 3 is, all right, that is the fate that will be changed. You know, like we have all been concerned with like what fate is going to be changed. And a lot of us, for everyone, the most important fate to a lot of players has been the fate of Aerith. But it seems like that fate has been settled. And now in part 3, that'll be the sort of, whatever changes at the very end of the entire story will be the fate that changes. I don't know if that made a lot of sense.
I mean,
but
just to like really quickly jump on that is that literally the ads for the game were, the world will be saved, but will you? And Aerith's line in Rebirth is, this is to save the world and you. Aerith didn't end up being the will you part.
Oh, interesting.
So the end result is, will Cloud be saved? Because this is also double meaning is that the world, it does not need to be saved, because it just depends on what your concept of world is. So does that mean Sephiroth's world, or does that mean the life stream? So you have to kind of just, and this is why you pushed Aerith's death into the third game, which is not relevant to the actual question, but it is 100% to create the resolution. I remember saying this on NSP stream, and it is buried into my mind like 3 years ago, where I said, finally, the thing that is a part of Cloud's being after the original is all of this regret of Aerith, of Zack, and these characters now having this new presence in the game. and his perspective of these events and who these people are is changing because of the way that Remake is telling its story, for the reason that Cloud's perception of their involvement in his life will cure essentially what ailed him after Advent Children, which is that he only began to deal with the grief of their loss because he finally accepted who he was and what had happened, and that it's not his fault. But that didn't heal the actual damage. So the reason for the emphasis of, like, what could be in dreams, or could I have made a better decision in memories, is to essentially working through the grief. So that was the thing I said to NSP is that he can finally rest. He can finally let go of these things. We can let go as the player of, like, you know, all of this like sort of perceived pain of loss that has happened. And I just remember one comment being like, "What grief? That hasn't happened yet." And I'm just like, mother, this is just digs into me every time. So the whole point of this is just to further his development is the reason. The reason for all of this is to further Cloud's development as a character. And I think if I was just looking at it through that lens and through all of the characters, that is succeeding 100%. The third game, guaranteed people will be giving awards to the game simply because of the Cloud livestream resolution scene. There is not going to be a shadow of doubt that because that scene is already super powerful, plus Aerith's death also being resolved at the same time, that is going to make everyone's eyes wet.
The question is, will livestream chapter 3, 5, 7, or 12 be the best livestream Cloud gameplay chapter? The interlude where you play as Cloud in his mind over and over and over.
Dude, if the final fight with Sephiroth in his mind, like after the Northern Crater, is just like the most smooth, buttery Cloud gameplay I've ever experienced in my life, and it's only in that sequence, wouldn't that be just hilarious? It's like,
maybe that's where Fusion Sword comes into play.
That would be pretty neat.
I want it to be like MGS4, the final battle.
Just punching
between Ocelot and Snake. You
Where
know,
they
just
kiss? I mean,
yeah,
where
yeah,
they
sure.
battle.
I mean, yeah, yes to all of that. Yeah.
Okay.
We got shirtless Sephiroth before. Now they'll both be shirtless.
They have to give that to us.
They have to. We deserve it.
We
We've
did
been such
already.
good fans.
I mean, you as long as he has a bathing suit outfit, you know, you can make it happen.
Yeah, mods will make it happen.
Clark.
I mean, I don't have much to add other than that. This is what I've been saying since the beginning: is that the entire purpose of this is to service the true crux of the game, which is the live stream sequence. And how you really hammer that home is that you make all of the stuff equal it, right? And so I do think that the live stream sequence, the crux, now has the weight to resolve all of the open-ended elements of the compilation that are worth closing. You know, it's got to close all of that stuff, and that includes, you know, this new end to Rebirth, you know, where we've got Cloud in a different mental state that needs to equal itself out. And I know that there's some pushback on making sure that that's a separate thing so that the live stream sequence is exactly the same. And I know that the motivation for a lot of that is very shipper related, but I don't think so. I think they took a big swing because they've always recognized that, like, even Hamaguchi himself recognized that for him, the scene that he was remembered most from Final Fantasy VII was Aerith's death, right? Well, I'm not saying that they failed in making a great game. They did. But if you ask most of the developers what the crux of the game is, and Hamaguchi was not one of them, they'll say it was the live stream sequence. Like, that's... So there is this opportunity for them to correct a misconveyance of the core themes of Final Fantasy VII to a new audience. by making, by dedicating more of,
Yes.
the meta plot to it. That said, though, what is the narrative purpose of the worlds? The narrative purpose is still, like, when you say ultimate, you mean like the end. The ultimate narrative purpose and the ultimate thematic purpose, might be a little bit different. And I think from a mechanical standpoint, we really can't get away from the fact that this is largely done to narratively create interest during a much longer development cycle than, to allow us to, stay engaged with the story while they finish it. I think that is its purpose for the narrative is to keep it ended. And how it serves the themes, though, I think is something we all kind of agree on.
The one thing I'll add to that is because like I agree, and I think most people agree on that, like, got to keep the story going, right? Like, even the developers have said, like, got to keep you guys hooked for the next 3 years, and I think that's very true. But I do think it potentially diminishes the potential integrity of it, right? Like, if these guys aren't complete hacks and they're like, there is something to the way you tell a story, and it's a big part of my next video, so I won't get too deep into it, but like, in a story, you think things are heading a particular way, from beginning to end. And usually right in the middle, there is a interruption. There is like something happens that seems to be like the counter to where you think things are going. And so I think that has been essentially what's been happening throughout this remake trilogy. We end the first game, we think fate will change. Second game happens, fate doesn't change. So it's sort of a disruption of like that potential straightforward path. And then the third game will close it. The reason it feels such a challenge, though, is that they're spreading it out over like 10 years. And you're not experiencing one story from beginning to end. Because like, it's satisfying when you reach the end of a movie and the thing from the middle is overcome. But it's like, now we're just like sitting with the middle of the movie hanging for 3 years. And so it feels less satisfied. The momentum feels messed up. It feels, I don't know. That's just, there's more to it, but I think this is simplest, I guess.
I have a chime in to the other aspect of what Clark was saying, which is that I've been thinking a lot about this subject to a point where I'm dabbling in writing a video about it. But I think just because it was brought up that it's worth going into is that I think what Clark said about the compilation and resolving those sort of tie-ins, I think one of the things that the compilation heavily leaned into was the concept of afterlife. As opposed to sort of the crux of the original game being very, I don't want to say overshadowed, but definitely encompassed the idea of loss more so in a very visceral manner. And it would be foolish, I think, to try and capture that feeling quite in the same way again. I think we've all revisited that discussion before, but the compilation introduced the idea of consciousness merging and consciousness being ever present in us. But I think what the compilation failed to ultimately accomplish was to make that feel like something worth adding to the story. And I think that was a lot of people's core complaint about a lot of what was added to Final Fantasy VII is should I care about these things? I think after experiencing the Tifa livestream sequence, I think it became super clear to me that the discussion and the reason for these apps, like these worlds and all this other stuff, is to really make you start to feel what it would be like in this world to sort of experience not loss, but the idea that there is something greater than what there is in reality, is to start to really kind of like go through the idea of like the way that we see through Tifa's eyes what this visceral feeling of experiencing, you know, an afterlife would be like. Hearing like your mother and father calling you as you're kind of visiting these memories, and then literally at the end of this sequence, her being like re-put together by the weapon at the end. It's very tapping more into that, which I think is why they made the conscious decision to offset Aerith's death to the finality, to kind of full circle bring the ideas introduced in the compilation, the ideas of Final Fantasy VII that might not have landed as hard in that.
Yeah.
Oh,
You can keep going. You can keep going.
that's it. That was it. But I saw the hand go up. I couldn't resist.
No, the thing I would add to, because you talk about the viscerality of it, right? And like, it's hard to re-experience something for the second time, right? Like,
Yeah.
And so that is why they've thrown things into chaos in a way that's at times pretty unsatisfying. Like Josh, everything you talked about at the very beginning of this conversation, all those emotions you had about the ending were emotions that I had. Like, I was not very satisfied by the ending the first time I experienced it. But like looking at the full sort of scope of things, right? Like, acceptance is such a huge theme of Final Fantasy VII, right? Like, acceptance of who you are, acceptance of what has happened to you, and this carries through all the way to Advent Children, where like Cloud has to accept everything, right? Like, he has to fully accept like what happened and has to come to terms with it. And in terms of that viscerality, I think there is potentially something to the idea of creating the potential that maybe Aerith did live in this like dream reality, right? Like, maybe this other reality was created where she did live on. But we have to then let that go, just like Cloud will have to let that go. And we will have to viscerally accept that we couldn't save her. We had this conception that maybe we could save her because of what happened at the end of Remake.
Mm-hmm.
But then we come to Rebirth and we couldn't save her. And in part 3, we will have to accept that just as much as Cloud is going to have to accept it.
We're going to have to press X to let go.
No, you're going to have to hold L2 and R2 with highest adaptive resistance. One hand at a time.
Is it her head heavier than her body? Oh God, the adaptive controls.
But I also hope that it feels like we are like Cloud, and we
it
have
really
to make
feels like we're losing air.
Yeah, make that like a real choice though, right? Like, because if these dream realities are treated as real things, if you could take a white materia from Aerith's dream and Cloud could be holding it in the real reality, then the implication is that Aerith is just as real as that white materia. And maybe we could bring her back. Maybe we really could bring her back, but there will be a reason why we can't. And because bringing her back would mess things up too much, or I don't know exactly how.
Yeah,
like,
I'm afraid of it going in the sort of Life is Strange direction, where it turns into it's always bad to mess with time and blah blah blah, because I feel like that's not really, I feel like it's tropey and it isn't. I mean, I love Life is Strange, but like right now I don't want that to be the big takeaway from FF7 is
because that's not a real lesson. You know, like, that's not a real valid message. Like, oh, you don't screw with stuff. Like, okay, but like the planet is dying. Can we screw with stuff until the planet isn't dying, please? You know?
I do think that there's some truth to what you're saying, though, in the sense that it is about getting to that point narratively of us making the choice to let her go emotionally. Right. Because I'm just thinking that, like, here's what's going to happen. And I'm starting to do that thing where it's like, this is how it's going to play out, but this is how it's going to play out. Is that we're going to be in that Tifa livestream sequence, and we're going to start plugging in memories of, like, oh, that doesn't align. Maybe she wasn't there or something like that. And Cloud starts to realize that Aerith is actually going to be gone. And then what's going to happen is we are literally going to play the moment where in this game we walked up to Aerith and our friends disappeared. we're gonna play the moment where they didn't disappear.
Slow walk.
All of the emotion of that scene is going to be playing through us because we're seeing the scene that we've seen 100 times in our heads, how this is gonna go. But what's happening to Cloud is that it's dawning on him that this actually is happening, and he's got to he starts to break down and open up emotionally. And we're gonna see how Yuffie reacts to the death, and how Barrett is crying, and how Red is dealing with it. And this is all gonna play up to us getting to her in the water, and actually the emotional release of letting her go. It will be he's let go of this sort of fictitious part of this reality, and is actually accepting her being gone, and the scene concluding. So it will be that.
Do we think this is the climax of the live stream sequence this time? Because I think it would be very weird to have this in the live stream sequence and then climax the live stream sequence on just oh, I thought I was Zack. I feel like the Zack thing has to happen first.
A swirl of black whispers is gonna come over Aerith as she's falling into the pool, and she's leaving us, and then it's and then Sephiroth's she's mine now, and then he throws his Dracula cape over Aerith, and then he's no, and then that will be the conclusion.
Yeah, that sounds right.
I do think the biggest challenge that they do have, though.
I agree with you, Josh. Just to answer your question.
I do too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Tifa will be right by your side the whole time.
Yeah.
Or something. I don't want to talk about that.
Whoever that is.
What if the playing through the stabbing and the slow walk and the burial, what if it's dead silent for the first half?
It's going to be.
No
We're
music
just going to be hearing everybody crying.
Anything.
The only thing you hear is the sound of your DualSense vibrating.
You're going to feel the water as you ease into the pool with Aerith's body.
I'll be so sad if there's no holding the body slow walking up the ramp. I need it.
It's gonna be there. I'm telling you, there's not a single way that it's
I forgot he doesn't walk up the ramp anymore because they probably bury her in the basement where it's ugly. Unless I have this batshit crazy theory that is probably not real at all, that them burying down there is the dark cloud memory of it, and that the brightly lit top part where they used to bury her in OG and Advent Children is where they actually buried her, but he's just remembering the visually ugly, dark, shadowy version of it. I don't think that's actually true. I think for simplicity game design's sake, they just don't want you to have to walk up all the way or whatever, but it's still very weird that they would change the location of one of the most iconic scenes in gaming history to not have that light shining in and everything.
I hope they make it so that you can go down a very uninteresting elevator, just like in the Nibelheim freaking manor.
Yes, that fixes everything.
The one thing I will add, though, is that I do think the biggest challenge that they have is how will they make that acceptance moment really hit? Because in the 3 years that we have, I think everyone has come to the conception. I've heard it in multiple podcasts, not just this one, where everyone is we are going to have to accept it, and Cloud is going to have to accept it. And the question is we are all expecting to come to a point of acceptance. So how will they do it in a way that actually hits it? That actually hits us?
Right.
I think everything we just described hits it. I think L2R2, let Aerith go, slow walk, hopefully, fingers crossed, see the actual stabbing. I said that on Twitter once, and somebody quote tweeted me and then deleted their tweet a few minutes later, but it said, "I can't believe you want to see a woman savagely brutalized like that," or something. I was like, uh-oh.
You mean getting stabbed like in the original game?
Yeah.
You mean the way that it just happened?
Yeah.
Well,
it's probably gonna happen again.
I agree with subtext. It is a barrier, and I don't know if what we've described is enough. We're relying on this, argument from incredulity here, where we have to just hope that the creatives are creative. So because there's a lot of pressure on the scene to deliver. There's a lot of pressure on all of this to deliver.
Yeah,
I think especially if you're because here's what they did is and this is why a lot of people are pissed off to begin with is that you delayed the thing that everybody wanted to see here. So now it has to count. Now it has to count double times the amount that you promised the original time.
Okay,
that it's gonna count.
I have a thought on this. So there's the whole take, which is like, this was the moment for it. The moment has passed. I do not sympathize with that at all, because all of the people, all of we who care about this, we have played through, seen that scene, know it's coming to like the maximum amount. Like there was not going to be a surprise element of it, and the fact that we saw a shortly edited, chopped up backwards version of it now, I really don't think will take away from seeing the full one, because what there's better graphics now. Like we've already seen the scene, we've already felt the emotions. Like I don't think what they did in Rebirth is going to take away from this for those of us who know this scene backwards and forwards.
I
Essentially. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say there is some good signs that this has already worked, at least for me, because after playing Rebirth and with the context of Rebirth's ending and going and watching Advent Children, I talk about this in the writing that I'm doing now, but I feel very little like seeing Aerith as a ghost in Advent Children, but it's one of my favorite like lore bits, and that area is very interesting, and the context of the conversation is very interesting, and how Zack shows up and how it's linked to all these things. But during the watching of it, I felt nothing originally. Like it didn't emotionally impact me in a way. It's like maybe for others it was different, but because of my background with Final Fantasy VII at that point, it was very dull. I didn't feel the way that I think I should have felt. But watching that scene now in Advent Children, I have the context of how Aerith is sort of shown off at the end of Rebirth, where the context of her conversation in Temple of Ancients resonated very clearly with me, where it's like, even though they're dead, it doesn't make it any easier. And that entire final sequence in Rebirth really does feel like that. It's like, it doesn't even matter if she is around. It doesn't feel like she's around. Every aspect of that scene is just making it just feel like she's just gone extra than she was like when she wasn't around. And in Advent Children, it felt very similarly, the way that they shoot her, the way that you don't make eye contact with her. Like Cloud doesn't even face her until the very end of the game or the movie. And that actually did emotionally resonate with me with that. So I do think that Rebirth is working. It is laid the groundwork for these ideas to work and to resonate with people. So I think just because we haven't seen, and there's a lot of like what ifs, part 3 isn't out, I think that part 2 has solidified the proper basis for a very good conclusion to the game. So,
when it comes to the thing of conclusion, I had pulled up something that, and I don't want to overdo it, but one of my favorite writings, there's a guy who's a screenwriter. He wrote like Aladdin and Pirates of the Caribbean and a couple other things, and he has a site from like the early 2000s or something. It's one of the ugliest sites you'll ever see, but it just has like a lot of columns that he wrote about writing, and one of my favorite ones is about endings, and he says a good ending must be decisive, set up, and inevitable, but nonetheless unexpected. And I'll save you from the rest of it, but like that, like it all has to add up, but it has to be unexpected is like the most difficult but truest kind of like thing. There is like, how do you still do it when we're all kind of expecting it? And that is the big question.
All right, so I haven't actually answered the final question yet, so I will do that, and then we can, if anyone has anything else to say real quick, or if chat has any super pressing questions to ask, but otherwise we'll ease it out. So my answer to the question of what are all these worlds leading towards is a couple things. So mostly I think it's further embellishing upon the themes that were already there in a way that makes the narrative compelling throughout a 3-part 8 to 10 year series. And I agree that it connects a lot to the live stream. So I really like the parallel that Cloud's sort of images in his head of being Zack and now of Aerith still being alive, these are his dreams of wishful thinking. These are his live stream worlds of optimism in a thematic way. And it's possible they may even tie that in. Like maybe the Nibelheim flashback we played through in Rebirth and in OG, maybe that is, maybe, or at least in Rebirth, maybe they're pitching that as a live stream world. Maybe that is one of these bubble worlds where it's like the real world, but the memory is sort of different. It's how you wished it could be, or it's how you fear it could be. And so the idea of that Cloud is going to have to let go of these dreams and embrace the real him thematically is going to somehow, maybe narratively, to tie in all of these optimistic dreams in a way that condenses the focus to the real world and embracing what you have and stuff. As far as furthering that to another plot development, which I think can be very compelling, I did not come up with this. Somebody commented on one of my YouTube videos with this, and I was like, oh my god, I think they figured it out. I love the idea that you have this empty white materia, and I haven't, done the cross-checking and trying to follow the A, B to Z, where is this materia coming from, are there two of them, blah, blah, blah. I just know there's an empty white materia, and materia is useless without knowledge/memories/dreams. So I think the one sentence answer to what is the point of these dream worlds, they are going to be the dreams of wishful thinking that power the white materia to defeat Sephiroth and Jenova for good. I'll be kind of surprised if that doesn't happen, considering they are showing us dreams of wishful thinking and an empty device that needs dreams to power it. I could totally be wrong, but I thought that was a very compelling idea. So
the very end of Remake literally has Aerith saying before you strike Sephiroth, everyone's wishes, let us fulfill them, in Japanese. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I think we're in for a wild ride.
Did we get it?
Yeah, we solved it.
We can go to another game.
It was really good though to have like a real concentrated conversation around these questions. Like I think we unpacked a lot.
Hashtag rebirth resolved.
Hey. Yeah.
Well, this has been extremely fun. Udrix asks, my question is, at the end of part 3, where do you want things to stand in relation to Advent Children? I personally want Advent Children to come before the remake trilogy in the canon, lead into it. I think it would be super cool if it cold opens just in Advent Children playing Cloud versus Sephiroth. Sephiroth loses, and then we follow him on a Balrog fall, like opening 2 towers into the live stream, and we see him initiate all of this, and then we see Cloud go through his whole grief arc in part 3 of this and end sort of in a better place than where Advent Children ended or whatever. That's my personal take on that.
I'm in the same boat.
I need that to happen now. I hope you're listening.
Please, Nomura.
That was mostly Major Trenton's idea from when I talked to Final Fantasy TV with him. And I was like, oh shit.
Good idea, Major Trenton.
Cold open, Balrog fall sort of thing. Playing as Sephiroth, of course.
Love it.
Thank you for having me on.
Yes, thank you so much.
Show.
Thank you, everyone.
Is it a show?
I don't know if it's a show. It's hashtag live streaming, everybody.
Hashtag live streaming.
Thank you all for coming on. I mean, this is the first time I've ever done this. I feel honored to have been brought into this lovely community, as it has been literally a life-changing sequence of events. And yeah.
Well, you did great.
Yeah, it was actually wonderful and very well curated. I thought all the questions were like super good. So
thanks.
Yeah, good job.
I'll go through and give it some timestamps for these very easy to spot glowing white questions on the left. And I don't know if it's worth it to like re-upload as a separate thing. I mean, it's already a YouTube VOD, but Yeah, I'm
I
excited.
didn't realize
Yeah.
the questions were lighting up like that. I wasn't really watching the video. I was looking
It,
at
it
chat.
actually, yeah. Well,
That's cool.
I'll after tomorrow, I'll give you some input on that, on whether to do
Yeah.
it separate.
Yeah, because
All
I saw Blitz re-uploaded the Max Talk in
Yeah.
addition
Reason
to the
for that.
VOD. I am curious to hear the answer.
Right.
All right. Thanks everybody for watching. And I'm going to wait like 10 seconds before I hit end stream because I always notice when people are saying bye on these things, they just cut off mid-sentence.
I think we do that
So
on
we'll wait
purpose
for
as a
10
running
seconds.
joke.
Is the point? Maybe I just wait for my wave to show up on the live thing on the YouTube.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for being in the
Bye.
chat.
Bye, everybody.
Appreciate- Thanks for being here. Bye.